Thank you for showing up. Oh my God, did he sit through the whole movie?
She likes the underdog tale.
Oh, good.
So how many of you have seen the film before? See, that's,
Oh, wow.
That's a statement.
Yeah.
An amazing statement. And,
Wow.
you know, tonight, the wonderful thing about the DGA, first of all, we didn't cut the credits, although they should have kept the lights down.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
But I want to talk about this film. I've seen it twice today because it's an extraordinary piece of work, and I think the other thing I want to talk about is the reaction to it, which is truly extraordinary. But let's just start at the very beginning, conception. Who conceived it? Why? What did you have in mind?
I conceived it. I conceived of this idea of you know, I literally, to be very specific, I conceived of it on Hollywood Boulevard outside the Chinese Theater. My previous movie was playing. It was called War Dogs with Jonah Hill and Miles Teller. Thank you. But I was out there, you know, when you have a movie and you kind of know it's not necessarily going to set the world on fire, and we're at the premiere, and I never sit through the premieres, I have too much stress. And I was out on the Hollywood Boulevard just kind of pacing around like I always do, and I was thinking about the movie business and where it's headed and how, you know, comic book movies have taken over. And I don't have anything against comic book movies, but they were never really my thing as a film fan. And I just was staring at a billboard for a comic book movie that was across the street, and I was thinking, boy, that really is where the business is headed. Do they all have to be like that? And maybe you can do it a different way. And I was thinking about the movies I grew up on, grew up loving, the movies of the 70s, Scorsese, obviously, Sidney Lumet, and thinking, what if you did one of those movies like that? And it really just started there. And it's very funny because I was out on Hollywood Boulevard and I got a phone call from Greg Silverman, who was the head of Warner Brothers at the time. He knows, because I've made a lot of movies there, that I'm always out on Hollywood Boulevard doing the premiere. And he was calling me because he was on vacation and he couldn't be there. And he goes, I knew you'd be outside. I'm so sorry that I'm not there. You know, my kids are starting school, da da da. And I go, hey, Greg, you know, I have this idea. And I pitched it to him on the phone. And he goes, I love it. I love it. You should, I love that. You should tell Kevin about it. Kevin also was the head of Warner's, Kevin Sujara. And by the time Kevin came out of the premiere, he goes, Greg's been texting me about this thing, tell me about it. And we rode over to the party in his car, and I kind of pitched it to him in the car, and I hadn't had it figured out. It wasn't this movie, but it was the idea of taking that genre and kind of, you know, doing a deep dive character study in that genre of Joker. And that was really how it started.
I mean,
and I haven't really told that story, but that's literally...
It's amazing, but I also a little bit of background too. That's a wonderful story, and it is absolutely true. But don't think that as a filmmaker, it happens that easily.
No,
it got much more complicated.
Right, well then, yes, I mean, it did. So they got really excited about the idea of it, and they said, okay, why don't you go off and write it, and so we can see it. And I called up my friend Scott Silver, who's a great writer, and I told him the idea. And we basically moved to New York, and we just started writing this movie. A year later, we hand in the script, and as a lot of us know out here, studios, regimes change quickly sometimes. So everybody that I had told the movie about was now not there anymore, and or handing a script into new people. Not that it was bad; it just was like a new, like, what is this and why now, and you know. So we had to then convince the new regime. Now we had a script. And that took longer. But I get it, and quite frankly, like hearing it at a party versus reading it, because what they read was similar to this, it's a bold swing for a movie studio to take really their crown jewels, which is their IP, which for Warner Brothers, DC is a huge part of that, and do what we wanted to do. So it took a while to convince and push it. You know, filmmaking is always those last 5 yards. I always say that to people. Anybody could get it down the field. Making a movie is about those last 5 yards, and those last 5 yards were a grind.
I mean, I think the fascinating thing about this is, this is so dark. This movie is so amazingly dark, and you know, movie studios, they want the lift. They want all that. So the fact that you were able to convince them.
Well, you know, it's interesting because they had a run of some of the darker stuff. I thought what Zack Snyder was doing was really interesting with with Batman versus Superman and the direction he had brought it in, but it wasn't necessarily connecting the way they wanted to, so they actually started to change and shift a little. And Wonder Woman, which was a huge success and great movie, and Shazam that was being shot at that time when we were trying to get this made, seemed to be more the direction, and this definitely fed in the other direction. So it made it doubly hard, but I think a key, as you know, and as a lot of directors in here knows, you keep it manageable, the money, the cost of it, which was always the pitch. The thing I pitched them out on Hollywood Boulevard was like, let's do, the independent versions of these movies. I mean, my whole pitch was like, start another label called DC Black. I compared it to like what Sub Pop was to Universal Music in the 90s. Like, we'll do this little label over here and we'll get filmmakers that don't want to be defined by these movies that already existed to come in and do these really personal character stripped down character studies. No CG, no CGI, no spandex, like these real movies. So, thank you. Well,
it's amazing that when you deal with this genre, which is a IP, you've got the superhero movies and you've got the Batmans and they all come before. So realizing that it was very subversive what you're going for here.
yeah.
And at the same time, you have set up the beginning of the relationship. There's Bruce Wayne.
Right.
And it isn't any darker than that.
Right.
In a way, it defines why he is who he is.
Well, yeah, certainly in this version. To me, that was one of the most interesting things. We started out as a origin story of a villain, but it kind of ends as the origin story of Batman. But this Batman, the Batman that grew up in this Gotham, that was my whole reason about this DC Black idea, which, by the way, they didn't agree to, and that's fine, we did one movie. But they're like, calm down, you're not starting a label here, but we can do one movie. So it's a very different, I think, this Batman, if you were to do a Batman movie in this world, he's a very different Batman who grew up in this world where the Waynes aren't held to really, they're kind of worshipped and they're a great family. We just had a very different take on the whole thing.
Absolutely. I want to get into this because you see a movie like this that is incredibly dark. You have a vision and you held to that vision beautifully. It's an extraordinary thing to see. But the thing that, to me, that I just can't fathom is how successful it's been. I mean, and I don't mean that to say that this isn't a great film and great films, but let's face it, films that are out there that are cotton candy, make billions of dollars. Yeah. This film has passed $1 billion, and it's not just in the United States, it's international.
Yeah.
So in a way, you tapped something that is the consciousness of not just the country, but the world. What do you think? How do you explain it?
That's a hard thing. We didn't expect it to do that, but we did think thematically we were tapping into something that I think is an across the board thing. I also think people kind of get tired of having processed food that's already kind of easy to go down, and I think we kind of, in the movie business, we're guilty of doing it because, well, it works. This is what they want, and I think that it's okay sometimes to challenge that idea, but I think thematically, you keep using the word dark. It's a dark movie. It's a dark movie.
It is dark.
It's dark in its approach, but really to me, what the movie's essentially about is the power of kindness. It's just told in a really dark world. And I think that's the thing that's really, that people have really responded to. It's funny because I had a kind of round table with the director of the Mr. Rogers movie, which is fantastic if you haven't seen it. And I don't actually find the movies that opposite. They're movies about the power of kindness. Ours is just told in an entirely different way. And so I think thematically, there's a lot going on in this movie. I think, income divide, that's everywhere in the world. I mean, you see it, there's protests all over the world, and a lot of them have been using Joker symbolically, which is scary, but also I get it. There's a lot of things this taps into, whether it's social services, mental health. It's, this movie's about a lot of things. It's about, like I said, the power of kindness. It's about the loss of compassion across the world and what that does to a society. It's about childhood trauma. I mean, this movie's also an argument to me for universal health care. All these things are sort of couched in this dark movie. And people have always said, well, you know, I think the negative people have said, well, the movie's really nihilistic. And I always think that's a way of kind of dismissing the film. I think it's actually not nihilistic, but it's about the consequences of a nihilistic society, which is an entirely different thing. And I think people are ready to sort of see that.
I think clearly. I mean, you see that response, you've tapped into something. Now, you know, we've all kind of read the easy rap here is, he's, and you started it by saying, I looked at those films from the 70s, you know, they had an effect on me and I'd like to try to, you know, move in that area. But, you know, they then say, oh, gee, it's just Taxi Driver, you know, regurgitated, which is bullshit, you know. I mean, pardon me, but it's a wonderful film, you know, and Marty's a wonderful director. But remember, that was the concept of Paul Schrader's. It was an original screenplay that started there. And, you know, I see so many influences in this. I mean, and let's forget the 70s. You know, go back to Metropolis and go to Dr. Mabuse, you know, where there is a world order.
Yeah.
And it is changing the nature of what people feel. And then you look, you know, Clockwork Orange.
Right.
You look at so many films visually. You know, there's an homage here to Seven, and I see
you see Seven.
I see I see Seven, and I see Fight Club too. Just in terms of that color.
I'll take Fincher any day. Yeah.
They're great, but you know, going beyond that, there are, you know, Serpico.
Yes.
You mentioned Lumet.
I mean, even like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Exactly. There's the thing
network
about
is a little bit in there.
Society that is gone amok, and we certainly are living in that today.
We are.
But you know, the thing is, none of those films had the success that this has. So I just think it's interesting that you can talk. You know, we go back to Fritz Lang, and we're working our way forward. Different times, different decades of filmmakers looking at society and saying it's dark, it's corrupt, it's problematic, and people are rebelling. And you've done it again. Mm-hmm. So I just want to mention that bringing forward. It's not,
I mean, it's funny because
film.
No, it's not one film. And as much as I love Marty and those movies, we were always more inspired by that time of movies. But really, where it really started, I love that you brought up Metropolis, which is definitely about income inequality and also the power of kindness in the heart. But really, where it all started was with another silent film, which was The Man Who Laughs. And that, if you've ever seen that movie, that was our first inspiration, and we looked at that, and then we realized that that movie, which we didn't know at the time, was actually the inspiration for the original comic writers on Joker, which was crazy as we discovered it like a week after we thought, oh my God, there's this link. But I mean, it's funny where you get your inspirations from. But when I talk about the 70s, it was more about this idea of character studies and how do you get them made nowadays. Not that they aren't made. There Will Be Blood is one of the greatest character studies of the last 20 years. The Social Network is a great character study. But it's fewer and further between than in the 70s where you were able to do these movies because they didn't have to make the kind of money movies have to make now to stay in the theaters and you know, cut through the noise. You know, there was a little bit about that too. It was like, how do you, that's going back to War Dogs. It's like, I thought we made a good movie, but you can't cut through the noise nowadays. There's so much between streaming and content and so many things for people to see. Movies and theaters have to really cut through all that, cut through the fog, so to speak. So that's a little bit of also where it came from.
I think there's another interesting thing here. You know, Todd, you know, came onto the scene directing comedies. You know, with old school. You see that. I think the first Hangover movie is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in my life. It's an R-rated movie, and the thing that was great about it to me as a director is that he was able to, without dialogue, make me cry with laughter with shots. At that very beginning, when he wakes up and and he opens the door and there's a lion and then there's a baby, nothing said, and at the same time I'm crying with laughter. That's brilliant, but even those are R-rated comedies. Yeah. And I think the other thing that you need to, I don't know if you know, but Todd did some documentaries early in his career, And, you know, he did a thing on C.C. Allen.
G.G. Allen.
G.G. Allen.
Thank you.
Is, you know, if you want to know the dark.
Yeah. Well, really, so many people that really know that film realize that that film, and this is basically a sequel to that film.
That's what I mean. It's
Yeah.
you know, you can, you know.
You started with music documentaries as well,
Exactly.
right?
You all come, you know, we come in a certain way, we get known for something, and then everybody says, well, that's what he does. They want to put him in a box.
Right.
And so that's what he does.
Yeah.
So lurking back there, it was the Joker, which I think is just an extraordinary thing. Let's talk about, I've got a lot of things I want to talk about.
Okay.
But, you know, did you always have Joaquin in mind?
We did, yeah. I mean, once when
Was he part of it?
No, but meaning I didn't know him. But when I called Scott Silver about the idea, I said, "Okay, here's the idea. Picture Joaquin Phoenix, da da da." And that was how I always, even when I pitched it to Kevin and Greg Silverman that first night. So we were writing it with Joaquin in mind, which is great. Although I didn't know Joaquin, so but for me, Joaquin, why? You know, people always go, "Why him?" You go, well, granted, he's one of the greatest actors of his generation. If you've seen the movies, you know. But it's also he always seemed to me, as an outsider, like he's a little bit of an agent of chaos. He has a little wild side in him, in his eyes. He likes to mess with fact and fiction that I always really respected when he goes on talk shows and things. You never know.
He did a documentary.
And he did a great documentary. So there's something about him that was just sort of an agent of chaos to me. And so we wrote it with him in mind, and we approached him.
Did you approach him with the script and he read it, or did you approach him and have a meeting?
Well, I approached him with the script in my hand, but I asked him to meet me before so I could set it up for him, because I thought he might not even read the script if it was just called Joker. And so I kind of pitched it loosely to him and then handed it to him. And that was another process. Joaquin was not necessarily keen on jumping into a comic book film, even though it's not. It's still called Joker. It still said DC. But that was a thing. It took 3 or 4 months on. Everything took a long time. But eventually, he obviously signed on.
Eventually, he committed.
Yeah, he did.
Extraordinarily committed. I mean, you know. So
but I always say he never really committed. One day he just showed up into wardrobe fitting. I was like, they're like, he's here. I'm like, he's here.
But I mean, he committed on camera.
He did.
He went.
Yeah.
And you know that relationship of director and actor there, because it's your camera is on him and allows him to create all these moments.
Yeah.
It's very operatic.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in different moments, but that's another thing I want to mention. The composer, extraordinary score.
Yeah.
Really great score. So, have you worked with him before?
I have not worked with her. It's a
Her.
woman. And,
Really?
Hildur Gunnadóttir.
Yeah.
She's from Iceland. She lives in Berlin now. My music editor, who's been the music editor on my past 6 or 7 movies, Jason Reuter, called me up and he goes, "Hey, when we were writing," he goes, "Have you seen Sicario 2? And I said, "No, but I love Stefano Sollima, who we were talking about outside. He directed it." And I said, "I gotta go see it. I haven't had time." He's like, "Go see it and listen to the score. I think you're gonna love this girl." And I did, and I loved it. And I called him up. I was like, "I get it," because he had read a few early pages of Joe. He's one of the first people I sent stuff to. And so we called her up, and with Hildur, I sent her the script, and I asked her to start writing music based on the script. I don't know if you've done that before.
Yeah, I've done that.
I have never done that, and she just started sending music before we shot a frame. I mean, I think maybe even before Joaquin had committed. So we had a lot of music developed to us while we were shooting, and we played that music on set all the time.
Wow.
The music was in the camera operator's ear half the time. When we looked at playback, we would play it over the speakers. It was really, it infected and affected the movie in such a great way. It just was.
I mean, I've done that with Andy Elfman. I just had the script.
That's
I sent it to
amazing.
him and said, just let your juices.
I love
you
that.
know.
Yeah, I never did that before, but it was amazing. Yeah, it was great.
That's great. And then, you've always used source music, but, my favorite rock group is Cream. And going to White Room at the end is so amazing to have it because it just fit.
Yeah, we don't really have that kind of music in the movie outside of that.
No, but you gave it a big, big moment.
Yeah, we did.
You shot in, Gotham is Gotham. It is. We always think of Gotham. In fact, New York has a nickname, which is Gotham.
Right.
But you shot in New York, all over New York. Your locations were extraordinary. And then you also shot some in New Jersey.
A little bit in Newark because, that beginning thing where he's holding the sign, which in the script we wrote as Gotham Square, which is Times Square kind of thing. Can't really find that in New York where every corner is a Chase Bank basically now. And in Newark there's this great 4th Street strip. In fact, David Chase is shooting the new Sopranos prequel out there.
Really?
Yeah, it's a great little spot in
Well,
Newark.
he's a Jersey boy.
Well, he is Jersey, but I mean, it actually is called the Sons of Newark. I don't know what it's something about Newark. But we kind of use that Newark for our Gotham setting. But what's interesting, what I was going to say about Hilder and even production design in general is, and I haven't had this experience, I never made a character study. I usually make movies about groups of people, and this is the first time I made a movie about one person. He's in 99% of every shot. And what you learn when you're doing a character study is everything else becomes a character. Yeah, score is always important in our movies. Location is always important. But when it's a movie about one person, they're actually a character. Like the score. So it was so helpful to have the music to Joaquin because it was something for him to play against or play to. The way in a normal movie you have other actors surrounding him. So it was really.
It's interesting. I don't know this composer, but the moment I saw the film, the moment it started, listen to this. It just rocked. It just continued to complement the imagery, and you could feel that, and she's Icelandic. That's interesting. So was she
this score can only come from somebody who grows up in 23 hours of darkness.
Listen to New York,
Right.
They probably are colleagues.
Right.
But it just works so beautifully with this.
Yeah, she plays the cello. It's a ton of cello on
Well,
it. She's obviously playing.
I mean, it just has that, and it's deep and
Mhm.
rich, and incredibly strong. It just and you use a lot of score. How much score is in this film?
I think it ended up being maybe like 48 to 52 minutes. I think, which is a considerable amount. I know. Yeah.
The stairways. The thing that's interesting to me, I'm looking at those stairs. Very famous. Everyone's talking about the stairway. But the thing that's extraordinary, you're looking up the stairs, but when you look back, there are hills back there. And I'm thinking, where the hell are there hills like that in New York?
In the Bronx. I mean, the Bronx has, the topography of the Bronx is really different than the flat grids of Manhattan. So that was a big thing in the script, was stairs, this idea of, this him climbing the stairs and that sort of descent into madness at the end. The stairs and mirrors play a big role in the movie if you see it again.
Did you know those stairs? Did your location scout find?
I knew there were stairs in the Bronx, and there are tons of stairs, and these are the most, these are the biggest ones. I had never seen those before, but I knew the topography in the Bronx was different, and we were talking about stairs, so we just started driving around the Bronx. And I think a location scout had photographed those and brought those to us.
Just really great. I just want to say that when you're a filmmaker, it's a collaborative process. It's a collaborative process, and the filmmaker leads, but you're only as good as your troops. And your post-production supervisor is my post-production supervisor, Lisa Dennis.
You mean my post-production supervisor is your post-production?
Exactly.
She's the best.
I started as she's great, and by the way, she started as Jim Cameron's assistant.
Oh, wow.
I'm talking about a tough beginning. But regardless, she just said, he's one of my favorite people. Of course, I thought I was. But the fact is, that's when you know somebody and they are really great, and they judge someone they work with, it's one of the great compliments.
Good, yeah, and she's a tough cookie. She doesn't just give out compliments.
She doesn't. I'm going to take a couple of questions, and they better be good.
Okay.
Hello there.
That's funny. That's not a real question. Okay. The dancing, one of the first things I said to Joaquin when we met about the script early, when I was trying to convince him to the movie, I was talking about Arthur, and I said, Arthur has music in him. Arthur, when I was a kid, my mother used to tell me I have heavy shoes, like I seem depressed, I think is what she was saying. And I said, Arthur has heavy shoes, I told him that. And I said, but he also has music in him that wants to come out. So in the script, we had 2 or 3 moments where he danced, and he really loved that. I didn't even know Joaquin was basically an amazing dancer. So that was in there, and then I think now in the movie there's 5 or 6 times that he dances, because he was so good that we just kind of kept injecting more of the dancing.
It is, the dance is extraordinary, because it's that moment where he calms and then he expresses himself.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of him finally shedding the mask of Arthur and becoming who he really is.
Exactly.
Fantastic job, a fantastic interview, Taylor. And this film is so touching, and I've been waiting for years for someone in the Directors Guild to take the auteur theory back into the hands of the directors. So my hat is off to you.
Well, I think it's been done a lot.
No, I
but
don't.
maybe not in this space.
I don't feel lately it has,
Oh,
and
I
I
do.
just hope you get the DGA award.
Oh, wow, thank
But
you.
beyond that, in this film, what is making this film so personal? Were you a stand-up comedian? Is this like Andy Kaufman? Like, what is making this, what do you love about Joker as a human being?
I mean, to me, it's just about the outsider nature of him and the idea that if somebody really, like I said earlier, the power of kindness, if somebody really just maybe treated him differently, I just connect with outsiders in a way I think a lot of us probably do. So I guess at the core of it, that's maybe the most basic thing I connect with.
But you didn't do comedy stand-up.
Well, I mean,
but they may not have done a comedy stand-up, but look at, as I said earlier, he made some movies that are incredibly, you can't.
Well, but what I was going to say is I've been surrounded by amazing
Dark.
comedians my whole life, and I've worked with Will Ferrell and Zach Galifianakis and Ben Stiller and Vince Vaughn, and I've worked with some of the really funny guys, and I know a lot more guys that do stand-up, and there's a darkness to some of them. Maybe not the guys I mentioned, let me be clear, but there's a darkness that comes with comedy. You did a film, The Comedian,
No, they are. And I was going to say that, what Todd did was he made really successful, very funny movies. But when you are working with those people who are incredibly talented, they are dark, and they are they don't laugh a lot, but and at the same time they go to work and they know how to make it work. And I just think that what Todd, and I know from some of his films, because I know the people on the set, when you take a group of people like that and you have to put them together, and they know it's a process of collaboration. The director is organizing them, but he has to let them, because
You have to let them score every so often,
Yeah.
right?
They know what they're doing, and they are funny, but they are, like I said, comedians by the nature of. I mean, Bob De Niro. You could just feel the angst of him in this film, which is wonderful, because
And in your movie as well,
Yeah.
which I really I thought captured the life of a kind of comic in his third act,
Right.
in a really tragic but funny way.
I'll take a couple more back there. Yeah.
So every frame, every centimeter of every frame is so stunning. So can you talk a little bit about your process working with your cinematographer and your production designer leading up to?
I mean, it's the standard process I think we all do, which is a ton of prep. Maybe it's not standard. I always start the production designer really early. I think I started Mark Friedberg 6 months before we started shooting. And then I try to get Larry, who's this DP who's shot my last 6 movies, usually 3 or 4 months before shooting. It's a little bit of a budget scare from the studio, but and they're used to it with me as far as getting those guys started early, and if you can make it work in your numbers, to me it's just so worthwhile. So Larry and Mark and I, we just start going through photo books, we start looking at old movies, we start talking about references. Me and Mark Friedberg drove around New York for 2 months before anybody else started. The Bronx, Brooklyn, Newark, It's just a process, but yeah, I think Larry in particular just killed it on this movie. We shot large format Alexa 65, which was really important to us, to shoot large format. We tried to shoot 65 film, and Warner's shut it down because it didn't work within this sort of low budget that I had pitched them. I was like, why did I say that? And so we switched to the Alexa 65, which I'd never shot before, but it was just beautiful. In fact, Larry just won the Golden Frog at Camera Image in Poland.
Really, in Poland.
2 days ago.
That's I don't know if you know Camera 5, but it's for cinematographers. It's the mecca. That's where they go.
It's
And
major.
it's fantastic.
And he won the top prize against like all these great DPs that he loves and worships. But yeah, I think his work really stands out in this.
Yes.
Me?
Yep.
I noticed that in this film, the talent coordinator for the Merle Franklin show was a woman named Shirley Wood. Shirley Wood was actually the talent coordinator for the Tonight Show in the 70s and 80s. Is that a coincidence?
No, you know, I think we might have. Sometimes we look things up and we're like, and then sometimes it ends up in the script and we're like, oh, we should change that. So I don't remember that, but I bet you that's not a coincidence. Like sometimes we mean to change something and then we forget. Is that bad, you think?
Right in the middle.
I don't remember.
No, right here. Yeah.
I just have a question about the scene, a brilliant film, by the way.
Thank you.
About the scene when he kills the guy and the little person, the reaction of the little person.
Yeah.
It was very funny. I'm not sure if it's supposed to.
Well, no, I mean, it's, you know, the movie is a study of tragedy and comedy, and that scene is sort of a combination one. There's a couple where, you know, that scene, I think if I was to teach a class, I would show that scene, because it really starts off one way and ends another way. It kind of goes through like 4 major emotions, where you feel for Arthur, and then he commits this horrible, vile act, and then you're in fear for Gary, and then there's this sort of comedy of Gary trying to get out, and then this love at the end. This is sort of the craziest scene in the movie. Yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the things that which I don't know if this is it's my perception, but you know, from all the way through, you know, Arthur is he's a victim at the beginning. He is someone who's looking for love. He's looking for straight. Yeah, he's looking for straight, you know, common dignity, reaction, and he keeps getting stomped on. And I think that's one of the keys here, is that with all the horrible things that happen, he in fact is reacting, and is a persecuted, individual.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that he goes after in most instances are pretty, outrageously bad.
Yeah, and really all of them. In all the instances of anybody he kills, there's somebody that, in his mind, fucked him over in some way. Yeah.
But I think
That's
that
why he lets the little guy, Lee Gill is the actor's name, go.
yeah, it's love at the end. He was the
Yeah.
only guy that
Yeah.
treated him well. But I think let's go back to that second question I asked. And again, it's not an attack. I love the fact that a dark movie like this was made. I love the fact that and remember, Todd has done a lot of very, very successful movies. So, the people at the studio, when you've made them that much money, kind of feel, he wants to do this dark thing, I don't know, I guess we should let him, because he did make us a lot of dough. He didn't just walk in off the street. But the fact is that he did it, and I know, by the way, interesting thing about Warner Brothers, you know how much they believed in this movie? They sold half of it off. They did.
Well, they did. But that's not abnormal. They take financial partners.
It's a smart move. You want to take it.
They take financial partners on a lot of their movies, so I don't want to single out that they made a mistake.
I'm not singling it out. I just think that when you realize that the film cost about 55,
60 in the
cost
long run.
60, and they made $1 billion, they have to give half that profit away. It's always,
He's laughing, not me.
it's always interesting in that instance.
It
Only
is.
because, from filmmakers' point of view, they have a vision. He had a vision. He sold the vision. He had a difficult time as the regimes changed, getting it up there. It's about filmmakers pushing. We're the Directors Guild, right?
Right.
I'm a believer, but you push and push and push, and everyone's saying no, no, no. And then, of course, when it works, they're going, yeah, it was my idea. But it was his idea, and I think we owe him a huge